Good evening, everybody, my dear friends. Welcome to another episode of Outlandish Talmud Stories, Outstanding Life Lessons, Class 46. Tonight's class is titled, Even a Sinner Has a Heart. I want to thank Mayor and Jessica Sismus for dedicating tonight's class in honor of the bar mitzvah of their son, Marcus Shimshon, and in honor of the birth of their new baby daughter, Samantha Leah. May Hashem bless you with lots of simchas all the time and lots of nachas from all your children and strength and parnasa and shalom bayit to be able to raise your children l'Torah, u'lechuppah, u'lema'asim tovim. If you would like to dedicate a class and help us do what we're doing, there's a link in the video description. Click on that and dedicate a class in honor or in memory of a loved one. Tonight's source sheet, there's a link in the video description. You can press on that and download the source sheet for tonight. We'll be studying one story, an outlandish story from the end of Talmud Masechta Tractate Sukkah, page 56a to b. Even a sinner has a heart. When we say the word sinner, very often we say that in a very derogatory way, in a way that we've given up hope. That person has no hope. That person has led such a sinful lifestyle, and don't bother. Don't bother reaching out. Don't bother judging them favorably. Don't bother finding any redeeming positive factor about them. They're over the deep end. Just let them go and move on. What is it about a sinner? A sinner, we talk about somebody in a spiritual sense, in a religious sense, somebody who has sinned, somebody who has violated the word of God, somebody who has expressed disregard for the word of God, for what God tells us to do, how to live our life. And a sinner doesn't care for that. So what is the value of such a person? Does such a person have a place in our community? Is there hope for such a person? Should we be spending time, effort, resources to reaching out, helping, nurturing such a person, or not? What is the position that a community should have towards the sinner? Tonight, we're going to learn about a real sinner. Also, we're in the 3 weeks now between the times historically that the Babylonians breached the walls of Jerusalem, which was on the 17th of Tammuz. We fasted on that day 1.5 weeks ago. And then 3 weeks later, them and the Romans in the Second Temple, they destroyed our temples on the 9th of Ab, the first and second temple. These 3 weeks are generally a period for a kind of mourning, a kind of reflecting on the tragedies and the downfall of Jewish sovereignty throughout our history. But it's also a time for reflecting on rebuilding. God's destruction of the temple was not just for the sake of destruction. It's not how God operates, but God destroys in order to rebuild. And one of the very special customs and traditions during these 3 weeks is to study about the temple. Because as our sages have told us, when we study about the temple and we understand it and we live it, then it's as if we're rebuilding it. The very speaking about it is already a stepping stone towards the rebuilding of it. And we await every single day for the coming of Mashiach and for the final redemption and for the rebuilding of the third and final temple in Jerusalem. So I've chosen a story tonight that also deals with some of the aspects of the temple. Let's get started right away. I hope you have the source sheet. It's on Talmud Sukkah, page 56a to b, and it's really what we call the siyum. It is the concluding part of the tractate Sukkah. This is the end, which is significant in and of itself, and we'll talk about that, why this passage was chosen to be the ending of a Masechet, the ending of tractate Sukkah. So, let's begin. In today's text, we actually have something that we don't normally have. We have a quote from the Mishnah and then a quote from the Talmud. You may be familiar or maybe you're not. So the Mishnah is the original rabbinic work of law that was redacted in the 2nd century by Rabbi Yehuda the Prince. And the Mishnah was a very concise version of rabbinic law, of the discussions of the sages up until then. First time something was actually codified and transcribed in a written work. It's called Torah Sheba'al Peh. It's called the oral tradition. It wasn't supposed to be written down. It's supposed to remain oral, passed down from generation to generation. But the leader at that time, Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, he made this very bold, audacious decision to actually transcribe the Mishnah. He didn't get a lot of popularity for it, but he reasoned that the Jews were in a time of great persecution. They were being spread around the lands. No longer did they have a central body, a central authority, the central role of community. So he feared that the tradition would become lost over time. And he was 101% correct. And therefore, it was invaluable that he wrote it down, and that's the Mishnah. Now, when you open the book of the Mishnah, you read, as we're going to see, a very concise law or concept. And then a lot of questions arise about how and why and where does this come from and what's the reason and what's the explanation. And that is the role of the Talmud. So for the next few centuries, the Talmudic scholars are busy explaining, analyzing, dissecting the Mishnah. And then the Talmud is redacted in the Babylonian Talmud in the 5th, 6th century after the Common Era. And that is the explanations of the laws of the Mishnah. And that's how the oral tradition works, because the next era after the Talmud was the era of the Gaonim. And the Gaonim are busy explaining or applying the laws and the concepts from the Mishnah and from the Talmud to their modern day circumstances, which was up until around the 10th century. And then begins the era of the Rishonim, the medieval commentaries, who are again continuing the flow, the evolution of Torah during their times, etc., up until our time. So I don't want to get distracted with the evolution of the oral tradition, the rabbinic tradition. It's fascinating, but let's get straight into our text. So the Mishnah makes the following comment. The standard procedure was that the members of the incoming watch divide the showbread in the north section of the courtyard and the outgoing watch in the south. Okay, what are we talking about over here? So let me give you some of the context and the background. It was the role of the Kohanim and the Levim, the priests and the Levites, all from the tribe of Levi, one of the 12 tribes. They worshipped in the temple. And the Torah was very adamant that the role should be divided evenly among all the Kohanim, all the Levites. So Moses, during his time, during the Mishkan, the tabernacle in the desert, divided all the Kohanim families into 8 groups. And these 8 groups, each group serves for a week. And the group in Hebrew is called a mishmar, which in English here is called a watch. They were watching over, guarding over, worshiping in the temple, and they did their role for a week, and then a week later, the next group came along. So there were 8 groups. Then towards when King David purchases Jerusalem about 300-400 years later, and they're getting ready to build the first temple in Jerusalem. So King David, together with Shmuel HaNavi, Samuel the prophet, they develop this a little further, and they divide all the Kohanim into 24 groups. So every Kohen family belongs to one of 24 groups, but again, the same system, each worshiping, each working in the temple for 1 week at a time. So everybody gets a turn every 24 weeks. When the temple was destroyed, most of the Jews were exiled to Babylon. Only a few of the Jews returned after 70 years for the rebuilding of the second temple. So only 4 of the 24 Kohen groups return. So they take these 4 families, these 4 groups, and they redivide them into 24 groups. So the 24 groups remain up until the end of the second temple, when it was destroyed in the year 70 after the Common Era. Very interesting, after the temple was destroyed, a lot of the surviving remaining Kohanim moved to the north, to the Galil in Israel. And though there was no temple, but people identified with their families or with their group that they belonged to. The groups have this prominent, prestigious kind of title and being a part of something. They were named after the original ancestors of the group. Each group had its name. We're going to find out about that soon. And so even after the temple was destroyed, in the synagogue each week, they would announce who would have been worshiping in the temple that week, which family name. And they would mention the name of that group, and they would talk about it. And there was a kind of connection with the past, remembering the glorious times, and probably a kind of yearning for the future, where hopefully one day the temple will be rebuilt and these 24 groups will be able to return and worship in the temple. In fact, it was a accepted tradition that if you were a Kohen and you knew which group you belonged to, and you knew that in the following week or the existing week, you would have been worshiping were the temple to be standing, then there was a practice among your group that group of Kohanim did not drink alcohol that week. The law was that a Kohen who was intoxicated by alcohol is not allowed to worship in the temple. So for that week, you didn't drink alcohol because you firmly believe that it's highly possible that the temple will be rebuilt. Mashiach would come, and the temple will be rebuilt in that week, and you'd have to rush off to the temple. Now, if you were drunk, intoxicated, you wouldn't be allowed to worship in the temple. So for that week, you stayed off alcohol. The Project-Rabbi once made a very interesting, important reflection on this idea. Because even if you are drunk, how long does it take to sober up? You've had a few drinks, you're at a party, it's not legal to drive, it's not legal to worship in the temple, but how long till you sober up? An hour, 2 hours, a little nap? And yet the Kohanim would not drink, thinking that possibly we'd be rushed right away to the temple. It takes an hour, 2 hours, or a little nap to sober up. In other words, what they were believing was that we'd have to be in the temple in less than an hour's time. Throughout those years, the Kohen believed that it could be that in less than an hour's time, I'm going to be in the temple worshiping. That's an unbelievable faith to hold on to. So that explains the system of the 24 watches. Now, when would they change shift? It would always be on Shabbat. On Shabbat, the new group would come and the old group would leave. Now, I want to show you something. If you look at the back side of your source sheet, I have there two images. Look at the left image, because this is going to give you an understanding of how it worked. The left image is a bird's eye view of the temple. You may have seen this before, and if you have, then it's familiar to you. If not, then it looks like a very complicated architectural sketch, which it is. I'm not going to go through the whole thing now, but just briefly. So here you're looking at the Temple Mount. This structure was built on top of the Temple Mount. To be clear, on the right side is north, the left side is south. The top of it is Ma'arav, is the west, and the bottom is the east. That's the direction that it was built. So you enter from the east, which is on the bottom of our page, and when you enter into that first large square with 4 small offices on each corner, that was called Ezrat Nashim, the courtyard of the women, the courtyard where the masses, even the non-Kohanim, could gather there. Then you see that little circular lines at the end of it. Those were the 15 round steps, which I think we spoke about a few weeks ago. The Levites would stand there and they would sing songs. And that leads into a gate, the gates of Nicanor, that's number 18. Once you enter past that wall, that was called the Azara was the holy courtyard. In that space, at least above those little lines that you see there, only Kohanim, only priests who were worshiping were allowed to enter into that space. That square box with a circle in the middle and on the left is a rectangle. That's a bird's eye view of the Mizbeach of the altar. That rectangle on the left, number 48, I think it is the ramp. The ramp that would go up to it, you would walk up to it, and then 47 is the large box, very tall by the way. And that was the Mizbeach, the altar, and above that were various pyres of fire. You could see 2 little squares there, or 3. That's where different fires were burning for different parts of the sacrifices. On the right side, you see 24 little circles with a little stick underneath that, right? What were they? That's important for our discussion. And those are called rings. What kind of rings? So those were the rings that were used when they were offering sacrifices, in other words, slaughtering the animal. When you slaughtered the animal, you wanted to put the animal in a position where it couldn't move too much, and it could rest, and then you would slaughter its neck. Now today they have very fancy machinery to hold the animal in place and to grab the neck. They didn't have that machinery in those days. Everything was much more handmade and manual. So if you look at the right diagram, it shows you these rings. You can see one, those circular rings, and then one, the cow is actually inside a ring. So the way these rings work, they were circular, and there was a circular, half circle hole in the ground. And this ring could open and close as you turned it in the circle, in the ground, in the earth. So when the animal's neck was there, you would close it up, and then when the sacrifice was finished, the slaughter was finished, you would open up that ring and bring the animal out. And that's the diagram over there. There were 24 of these. Each family, each watch, each group of these Kohanim had their own. Just to let you know what's further in the temple. So once you go into that structure on top of, in other words, more western of the Mizbech, the altar, you're entering into the Ulam. The Ulam is the great hall. That's that wide piece. And then you're entering into the holy, the room that's called holy. There was the menorah, there was the Mizbeach, there was the showbread. And then you entered into that final square room that's called the Holy of Holies. That's where the Aron, the Holy Ark, was. We spoke about this a few weeks ago. And only one person, the high priest, on one day a year, on Yom Kippur, would enter into that room and offer the incense, as we spoke about last week. Okay, so now, this shift, going back to our discussion, the shift of the Cohen group changed every Shabbat. On Shabbat, as the shift was changing, the new group would come and the old group would be leaving. They took all the showbread, all the breads that were stored in the room of the holy, and they divided it among themselves. Half went to the old group, half went to the new group. But how and where would they divide it? The old group would gather on the left side of the Mizbeach, on the southern side of the altar, and the new group would gather on the right side, on the northern side of the Mizbeach, where those rings are, where they would slaughter the animals. What's the significance of that? Well, the right side of the Mizbeach is a very holy section. A lot of holy worship happened over there. They would sacrifice the animals there. And so you ushered in, you welcomed a new group who's coming for a week of holy worship in the temple, and they did their bread breaking and they did their induction in that holy space. Versus the old group that's finished their worship and is now exiting the temple, and they're not going to be back for another 24 weeks or so. They gathered on the left side, on the southern side, where nothing significant, nothing too holy happened over there. It was a holy space, but there's nothing so prominent that happened over there, and that was signifying they're now leaving the holy space and entering into the mundane world for the next 6 months or so. Okay, is that clear? I hope it is. Let's move on with our story. However, there was one exception to this procedure, this ceremony of welcoming in a new group on the Shabbat. The watch of Bilga. Bilga was the 15th out of 24, the 15th watch. Who was Bilga? Bilga was the ancestor of this family, of this group, and the group became known as Bilga. Due to a penalty imposed upon it, always divides the showbread to its members in the south, even for the incoming watch. Bilga, for some reason, was punished. And even as they're entering for their group on Shabbat, and they're going to be worshiping in the temple for the next week, they don't go to the right side and eat the showbread over there in the holier space, but they're sent to the left side. That's their punishment, to be humiliated in that kind of way, not be given the opportunity to introduce their week of worship in that holier space. That's one punishment they received. There are two more punishments. What were they? Number 2, their ring used to facilitate slaughter of the animals was fixed in its place, rendering it useless. There were 24 rings, we said. Each one could slide through, so you could store the animal's neck in there, hold it in place, and then let it go. The ring of Bilga, of their family, was locked in its place. They weren't allowed to use it, which meant that when they wanted to sacrifice animals, and they had to every single day, they had to ask another Kohen family, another Kohen group, if they can use theirs. And the Kohen group would say, what's wrong with yours? And they would say, well, we were punished and ours was locked. And that would be, again, another humiliating experience for them. It's another punishment they had. And the third and final punishment was their niche, among the niches in the wall of the chamber of knives, where the priest would store their knives and other vessels, was sealed. Along the walls of the temple, if you want to look back at your diagram, there were lockers. And the lockers were used for each of the Cohen families to store their tools, their equipment, knives for slaughter and other slaughter tools that they used. They had a locker and their own key. That was their space. Every tradesman comes to work with their own tools. Bilga, being one of the 15th, one of these families, also had its own locker. But its third punishment was that its locker was deadbolted. It had no access to its locker, which means, again, it had to borrow, had to make use of another family's locker, which was another humiliating experience for them. That is the end of the Mishnah. So the Mishnah told us about this general procedure of the outgoing and incoming group of a new Kohen watch, which I described to you. And then it told us about 3 punishments of Bilga. Why? Who's Bilga? Why were they punished? What happened over here? The Mishnah doesn't explain. The Talmud, the commentary on the Mishnah, will explain it for us. Let's learn. The Talmud says that the sages taught, listen carefully, there was an incident involving Miriam, the daughter of a member of the Bilga watch. One of the many people. Her name was Miriam. Just to give you some background when this is during the times of the Second Temple. This is about 100 to 200 years before the Common Era. It's during the time that the Assyrian Greeks have dominated in Israel. And of course, you're familiar with the story of Hanukkah. Hanukkah was the ultimate battle that the Hashmonaim fought, the Maccabees fought against the Greeks, and finally redeemed, liberated Jerusalem. So there was a long time where the Assyrian Greeks had control over Jerusalem, not just over the territory, but over the lifestyle of Judaism. They banned many laws. They banned the study of Torah. They banned many mitzvot. They banned circumcisions. They banned festivals. They banned various offerings. And then they went and did further desecrations in the temple and in the Jewish community. It was a time of great oppression, great difficulty, great sorrow in the Jewish community. Here we have a young lady, her name is Miriam. What did she do? She apostatized. She left the Jewish faith. She turned herself into a Greek. And then she went and she married a soldier. In the Aramaic or in the Greek, it's a sardiot. It's a high-level soldier in the Greek army, serving in the army of the Greek kings. Imagine that. Not just leaving the faith, but joining the enemy, marrying them. And furthermore, when the Greeks entered the sanctuary, there was a time that the Greeks came into the temple to desecrate the temple. Her husband was the chief officer who's leading the battalion into the sanctuary, and she joins along with him. And her husband, it says, was actually carrying a pig in his hand, and he brought the pig, the most symbolic unkosher animal of filth and of spiritual impurity, and he's bringing it to defile, to desecrate the sanctuary. And we know from the story of Hanukkah that they took all of the flasks of oil which were used to light the menorah. They were pure. They had the seal of the high priest that they had been made in purity, and they defiled all of those flasks of oil as well. So their job was to really not just physically destroy, but spiritually tamper with the sanctity of the temple. And so here, that's what they're coming in for. And Miriam walks in together with her husband to help them in this task. Then something very dramatic happens. As she's making her way into the temple, she arrives at the Mizbeach, at the altar. She takes her shoe off, her sandal. And with her sandal, she doesn't take it off. It's on her foot. But she begins to kick with her foot, with her sandal, against this Mizbeach. It's a stone structure. And she kicks on it violently. And then she cries out, "Lukus, lukus." That's Greek for wolf, wolf. "Until when will you consume the property of the Jewish people? And yet, you do not stand with them when they face urgent circumstances." She's screaming out to God. She's barraging against God. She's cursing God. She's saying, look at this Mizbeach. She compares it to a wolf. What's the idea of a wolf? I'm a wolf. What's the idea of a wolf? The Mizbeach, the altar, was compared to a wolf. Just like a wolf devours sheep, the Mizbeach would devour a sheep every single day. At least 2 sheep. In the morning there was a sheep offering, and in the afternoon there was a sheep offering. So she compared it to a wolf. By the way, it's not her own metaphor? It comes from the Torah. The Torah, in Jacob's blessing, or in Moses' blessing to the tribe of Binyamin, in Jacob's blessing, to the tribe of Binyamin, he says, Binyamin ze'ev yitraf. Binyamin is like a wolf who devours. What is he talking about? So it's a reference, the commentaries say, that when the Jews will move into Israel and divide the land among all the tribes, and eventually King David's going to buy Jerusalem and build the temple, in whose section of land will the temple be built? So it was built between two sections of land, between the section of Yehuda, of Judah, and of Binyamin, of Benjamin. Somewhere in the middle was the border. The Mizbeach, the altar, was in the section of Binyamin. So the blessing to Binyamin was Binyamin ze'ev yitraf, a wolf who devours. The altar, which is going to devour the sheep every single day, is going to be in your territory. So Miriam is using this metaphor, but she's screaming to God and she's saying, here you consume the property of the Jewish people, you waste their money, they're busy spending money on animals to sacrifice on the altar, and now look at them in their time of need. And now the Greeks are taking over. Not only taking over control over Jerusalem, but control over Jewish life, and are trying to ridicule and get rid of the Jewish religion. And where are you, God, to protect them? You're not here. The Greeks have taken over. My husband is here with a pig in his hand to defile and desecrate the temple. Could you imagine? A Jew from the community doing this and saying this? A tragic moment in Jewish history. What happened to her? What happened to her family? Well, after the victory of the Hasmoneans over the Greeks, once the dust settled, and once the Jews liberated Jerusalem and restored the temple back to use, when the sages heard about this matter, the story was reported, they decided to punish Bilgah, to punish the whole watch. They fixed the ring in its place. They didn't give them access to their own ring, which would be a humiliating experience for them. And they also sealed their niche, their locker, so they couldn't have access to their own knives. And they also decided that even when they enter into their watch, they're not going to be on the right side, and the more prominent side, they're going to be on the left side. All these three things are a punishment from what Miriam, one of their daughters, one of their young ladies, did in the temple. Some say that the watch of Bilgah was penalized for a different reason. What's another reason possibly they were punished? Because some members of the Bilgah watch tarried in arriving at the temple. In the family of Bilgah, they were not so eager on coming on time. You had to be there at 12 p.m. or whatever. Some of them showed up a few hours later. Some of them showed up the next day. They knew that others would come on time. It's a large group, so we didn't have to be on time. We're enjoying the weekend. We live on a farm. We'll come the next day. So because of the coming late, they desecrated the honor to worship in the temple. So they were punished in that way. The Gemara clarifies. So we have two reasons. One reason is the family was punished on account of Bilgah, Miriam, and what she did. And the second explanation is that the family was punished because of some of the people who would come late. So the Gemara clarifies. Granted, according to the one who said that Bilgah was penalized because members of the watch tarried in arriving at the temple, I understand why the entire family was punished, and he locked their ring, and he sealed their locker. I get it. According, however, to the one who said that one woman, one representative, Miriam, she misbehaved, who apostatized and married the Greek and desecrated the temple and the Mizbeach, do we penalize the entire watch of Bilgah because of one daughter? That doesn't explain why we punish the whole family. Abaya answered, yes, it does explain. You know why? As people say, the speech of a child in the marketplace is learned either from that of their father or from that of their mother. If Miriam is saying such things, she's turning to God and making accusations. God, where are you? Why are you not defending and protecting your people? You're taking all their money, you're taking all their sacrifices, but here they are suffering and you're not helping them. Where did she get that from? She didn't make it up. Children learn things from their family. It must be that her father or her mother or someone in the home is speaking that way. And because they're speaking that way, she speaks that way. And because of that, the family of Bilgah was punished. It wasn't just her, in other words, that's at fault. She's coming from a larger picture. Her family was at fault also. So the Gemara asks, it still doesn't explain why the entire group of Bilgah was punished, and due to Miriam's father and mother, do we penalize an entire watch? So punish her particular family, her mother, her father. But what about the entire group of Bilgah, which consisted of many families? Why were they punished? What did they do wrong? Abaye gives the answer again, and he says a very famous principle. He teaches, Oile rasha ve'oile shchenoi. Woe unto the wicked and woe unto their neighbor. If Miriam's family was wicked because in her home her parents spoke negatively, derogatory about God, about the temple, then they were considered a wicked neighbor. If you chose to live among them, if you chose to be part of their social circle, then you too are cursed as well. You too are punished as well. And then Abaye concludes, again, the same is the opposite. Good for the righteous and good for his neighbor. Right? The same thing could work the other way around. If you live next to, if you live around, if your social circle, you have that tzaddik, the righteous person, it'll rub off on you. You too will benefit from the righteousness of your neighbor. And that is the conclusion of Tractate Sukkah. Okay. That's a very outlandish story. And there's so many things we could take apart over here. Every single line requires a bit of a discussion over here. But I want to focus on a few things of the story here and ultimately get to our topic, which is even a sinner has a heart. The first thing I want to discuss with you is the idea about the influence from a neighbor. A neighbor's influence. We just said that as Abaye ruled. What's the reason at the end of the day? What's the reason why the family of Bilgah was punished? So first we said because Miriam did something nasty in the temple. So because of her, the whole family should be punished? No, because it comes from her home. Her home's also a wicked home. And because of one home, the whole group should be punished? Yeah, because they were neighbors. They were part of the social circle. So they suffer as well. In other words, we're learning here about a very important factor of life, and that is the influence of our social circles, the influence of our neighbors. In 1987, a very groundbreaking book came out. It was called, I have it here, it was called The Truly Disadvantaged by author William Julius Wilson. And it was a groundbreaking study in the impact, the influence of the neighbor effect. And in that book, it really explains the sociological demographics here in America on so many levels about lifestyles and values and standards and living conditions based on neighborhoods, which is based on the influence of one neighbor to the other, right? So he suggests that living in a neighborhood seriously affected by poverty affects a wide range of individual outcomes, such as economic self-sufficiency, violence, drug use, low birth weight, and cognitive ability. We talk about voting blocks, right? It all works by neighborhoods because neighbors have either subconsciously or consciously a very powerful influence and impact on you. The source of this is in the Torah, by the way. You didn't have to go to William Wilson to find out about this. It's in the Torah. The Medrash comments about different tribes of the Jewish people. So, for example, the rebellion of Korach. Korach was from the Levite family. He was a nephew or a cousin of Moses and Aaron. He was a prominent person. Korach was from the family of Kahat. Kahat had the job to transport and carry the most holiest furniture of the tabernacle, even the Aron, the Holy Ark. Korach was a very devout person, and yet he stages a rebellion against Moses and Aaron, against their leadership. Why? You the leaders, I should be a leader. We should all be leaders. And we know he reached his end where the earth swallowed him up with his family. He wasn't alone. He had a group of rebelliers. Who was in his group? So we know there were a lot of people from the tribe of Reuven that joined his group. Why from the tribe of Reuven? Why not from any other tribe? So the Medrash says, because where did Reuven live? In their camping structure in the desert, which was a square around the center was a tabernacle. Where was the tribe of Reuven? They were positioned right next to where the families of Kahat from the Levite tribe were stationed. Korach's family lived right next to where the tribe of Reuven camped. All the Rashava, all the Shechino, woe is to the wicked and to their neighbors shows you, he's proof how much Korach rubbed off on his neighbors on Reuven. So much so that people in Reuven, what did they care? Why did they get involved? They got involved because they were influenced by Korach. And you have the other way also. We know that there were some tribes who became very prominent in their knowledge and study of Torah. They became like communal leaders among the Jewish people. For example, the tribe of Yisachar and the tribe of Zevulun. And the tribe, there's one more tribe that the Medrash mentions, the tribe of Yehuda. Yisachar were dedicated to Torah scholars. Even Zevulun, which were businessmen, they were in Israel already, they lived on the port cities and they were involved with import and export. But even Zevulun became great Torah scholars. How did they have the time? How did they have that ability? So here's proof of the other principle. Who did they live next to in the desert? They camped next to the camp of Moses and Aaron, their homes. So they were rubbed off by the influence of Moses and Aaron. You have good neighbors, they rubbed off on you also. And they became masters of Torah. So that's the source for this idea. But it's not just an idea that is sourced in Torah, but it's a real life concept. It's the nature of human. It's the way we are created. I want to read for you a passage from Maimonides. Listen, he describes this very eloquently. It's in Hebrew, I'm going to translate it into English. Maimonides writes, "It is the natural way of a person to be influenced and drawn after the opinions and the actions of his friends and those who are around him, his social circle, his neighborhood. And therefore, a person must make every attempt to attach themselves to the righteous people, to live among them, to hang out among them, so you can learn from their ways and be influenced by them. And a person should distance themselves with a 10-foot pole and more from those who are wicked and those who live a life of darkness, so as not to learn from them." And he quotes a source from Shlomo HaMelech, King Solomon in Proverbs: "Those that go with the wise become wise, those that pasture among the fools become wicked." And therefore the Rambam says, if a person lived in a country or in a city where their ways are wicked and evil, you should leave that city, sell your home, move somewhere else, move to a city where their people are righteous and conduct themselves in upright ways. And what do you do, the Rambam says, if you live in a city, you live in a country where everybody, right? There's nowhere to move to, meaning the whole country has been polluted by ways of cruelty, by ways of corruption. There's nowhere good to move to. You have no such option. So it feels like it sounds a little familiar sometimes. Or you live in a wicked city. You want to move to a good city, but you're unable to make the move because of the government, because of the, you have no passport, there's no immigration possible, or because you're sick, unable to travel. So the Rambam says, if you have no other solution, you know what you have to do? You have to stay at home. You have to live like a hermit. Don't go out on the streets. It's dangerous to go out on the streets if you live in a place which is corrupt and polluted by evil ideas. And if the people of the city are pressuring you and they say that you cannot live in our city if you don't participate in our community, you got to show up, you got to be a part of the people. They don't tolerate the fact that you wanted to stay at home, secluded from everyone else. So the Rambam says, then you have to go out to the deserts, to the caves, and live there alone as a hermit. But chas v'shalom, don't find yourself living among sinners and participating in their lifestyle, because it will influence you into being a bad person. Such a powerful concept about ourselves, about our children, right? Who are our children's social circle in school? Who do they hang out with? Who do we hang out with? Where do we choose to live? Which street do we buy a home on? Which community do we want to move into? You know, in the Jewish community, we're pretty particular about the kind of places, locations we buy our home because we want to live in the Jewish community, we want to live near the synagogue, near the kosher stores, near the general, JCCs and communal programs. That itself is a powerful thing. In most of the world, you choose a home based on affordability, based on where you got your job, and hopefully one day you go meet your neighbors and they're good people. You have to be very careful about that. Now, of course, living in Jewish communities becomes very pricey, and demand and location, it becomes highly challenging, and then they want to build new communities. Okay, we're not dealing with that problem, which is actually a bit of a crisis right now. But in general, to think about where you live, who you hang out with, where's your connection, where's your hangout places? Let's take a step back for a moment. We have a comment over here. This lesson is critical. We must be a good neighbor and influence on our neighbors and social networks. Very true. Do you even know your neighbors? Do they know you? How much interaction do you have with them? You know how much influence you could have? How much you could be of assistance? How much you could help? Let's take a step back for a moment. The first answer of Abaye was that the reason Miriam was a wicked person was she learned it from her home. Before we get to the neighborhood, let's talk about our homes. You know how much children learn from their parents? Parents don't even realize the things that they're looking at on their phones, the things that they're reading, the things they're talking about in phone calls with their colleagues, the things that they're watching on the TV. Your children are in the home. They know exactly everything that you live and breathe, right? And they go into your stuff, and you live in the same home. How careful do we have to be about showing an example, not by instructing our children? We don't teach them by talking to them. That's not how we teach them. We teach them by showing them. It's irrelevant what we say to them, what we communicate. The only thing that works is the lifestyle that we live. And if we live a pious, respectful, honest, upright, holy life, the things we read, the things we watch, the activities we do, how we spend our free time, these are the biggest teaching moments that raise our children. If you want to know what's going on in somebody's home, just talk to their children. I do it all the time. Well, ask a child a few questions. You find out everything about their family. Try not to be too nosy, but sometimes there's important information to find out. How much more so the neighborhood? So that's a very powerful testament to the power of Jewish community, living in neighborhoods that are connected with the synagogue, with faith, with God, with good deeds, right? Look what we're seeing now as a result of Surfside. Unfortunately, what we're seeing, the power of the community rallying together. Where else in the world do you have, which other society in the world do you have where chas v'shalom there's a tragedy, and maybe a few neighbors, a few good Samaritans will step up and try to do something? Where else, which other society do you have where there's a tragedy and literally tens of thousands of people are rallying up to donate money and prayers and send mountains of supplies? It's all from a neighborhood. So if you live in a no good neighborhood, you're going to have a problem. And if you live in a good neighborhood, you're in a better position to succeed. The power of the neighborhood. That is a lesson from our Gemara. Let us conclude with the final and main point that I want to teach for tonight. Gary, thank you. Our language and what we say is critical. Children are sponges and they absorb whatever they hear. 100%, I couldn't agree with you more. Okay. Now, I want to ask you a question which will lead us into our final discussion. The final part of the Talmud, if you recall, on side 2 of the handout, Abaye was answering. He was answering the question. I understand why we're punishing Miriam because she acted terribly in desecrating the temple. I understand why we're punishing her family, her parents, because it comes from them. They taught her this. But why are we punishing the whole group of Bilga? So Abaye answered, because we have a principle, woe unto the wicked and woe unto the neighbor. They too get punished because of their neighbor. It's not just that since your neighbor is wicked, therefore you're getting punished as well. I mean, that doesn't make any sense. It's like the parents that send their child to school with a note. And the note is given to the teacher, and the note says, "Dear teacher, if my child misbehaves, please slap the person sitting next to him. He'll get the message." We don't punish your neighbor because of the wicked ways of you. But the point is that you too without even knowing, are becoming wicked if you live with a wicked neighbor. It just affects your home, your culture, your environment. So that answers the question of why we're punishing the whole family of Bilgah. But then there's one more line that's added that seems out of place. And it says the opposite. It says, good for the righteous and good for his neighbor. Okay, beautiful teaching, a true teaching, but what's its connection to our Talmud? We're coming to answer the question of why we're punishing the family of Bilgah for just the sins of the family of Miriam. And we answer because they're all neighbors to these wicked people, so they're for sure accountable, they're for sure wicked as well, they get punished. What's the connection to the final teaching of good for the righteous and good for his neighbor? That doesn't belong over here. There's no righteous over here. This is the wicked over here. So some commentaries say a simple answer. The answer is that we have this concept, whenever we're concluding a book of the Talmud, a tractate, we always want to conclude on a good note, on a positive note. Imagine if we ended the whole tractate, somebody studied all 56 pages of Masechta Sukkah, and they get to the end and they invite all their friends to a siyum to make a wonderful celebration, concluding the Talmud, and they finish, the last line is, woe unto the neighbor, woe to the wicked, and woe unto the neighbor. And the crowd is sitting there. I mean, that's really inspiring, right? So the sages put in the next teaching, which is the opposite, to say, well, let's finish on a positive note. The same thing applies for holiness, good for the righteous, good for their neighbor. And that's a principle in general. If you're giving a speech, you should know that. If you're teaching, you should know that. Always end on a positive note. Never let your readership or your audience sort of end on a downer. Walk out of the room all gloomy. That's not very impactful. Nothing wise with that. Always find a twist to end on a positive note. But the Lubavitcher Rebbe, in the year 1975, I believe, once was making a siyum, was making a conclusion on Tractate of Sukkah publicly in front of thousands of people. This was actually on the date of the yahrzeit of his mother, on the 6th of Tishrei, between Rosh Hashanah and Sukkot. And he was teaching this final passage of the tractate, which we just learned. He said, there must be more to it. It can't just be that the sages put this line in because of, to end on a positive. There must be more. This is actually deeply connected to the story. And to explain that, he says, let's understand deeper this whole story. First of all, why are we being told this story? This derogatory, negative story, defaming story of Miriam, the daughter from the family of Bilgah. There's a lot of tragic stories, unfortunately, throughout history. And there's no need to talk about them. I mean, they don't have to hide from them, but why is it being recorded in the Talmud? We would assume anything recorded in the Talmud is a lesson for us. What is the lesson to be gained from learning about the wickedness of Miriam and what she did to leave her community, to become an apostate and marry a Greek officer? Why are we being told about her? Second question the Rebbe asked. Even if there's a need to tell the story, to understand the context of the times, why are we being told her name, Miriam? There are many stories in the Talmud that are told without a name, a person. Why mention the name? If the story is one of praise about somebody, good thing, mention their name, let them be praised in public. But if the story is being told about derogatory, somebody nasty about somebody, why would you mention their name? Spare them the shame. Don't we have a principle that the Talmud teaches us? We should always speak nicely about others, never to speak negatively about others, never to use not nice words about others. Even about animals, we have a teaching. And the teaching goes that when Noah was loading all the animals onto the ark, so the Torah says he loaded 7 of each behema tehora, 7 of each kosher animal, and 2 of each behema asher einena tehora, the animals which were not pure. Why does the Torah, ask the Talmud, why does the Torah add so many words to call the non-kosher animal behema asher einena tehora, the animal which was not pure? It could have just said behema teme'ah, the impure animal. Saved yourself 3 words, saved yourself 8, 9, 10 letters. The Torah always tries to be concise, not to add unnecessary letters or words. Why does the Torah do this? And the Gemara answers, because we don't want to speak about the gnus, about in a derogatory way, even about animals. If you can call them impure, or you can call them that they are not pure, that's a more refined way of saying it. And so we'll add the extra words and letters just to avoid publicly shaming them. This is about animals. No, how much more is it about a human being? As wicked as Miriam was, why do you have to mention her name? There was a person. This is a very important principle on a side note about the cleanliness of language and the using words in a positive way. The Rebbe actually was emphatic about this. He didn't like using words like deadlines. Deadlines is not a good word. Due date is a better word. In our family, we try not to say that the battery is dead in the phone. We don't like to use that word. The battery needs to be charged. We try to use those kinds of words. The Rebbe in Hebrew did not want to call hospitals Batei Cholim, home of the sick. We don't want to call them sick. Batei Rufu'ah, home of the healing, is a better name. And there are many other examples of which don't come to mind to me right now, of trying to use language in a constructive, positive way. So why are we mentioning Miriam's name? Next question. What was Miriam's big sin that she was punished for? Right? So she did a lot of big sins. She became an apostate. She left the Jewish community. She left the Jewish faith. She joined the Greeks and their lifestyle. She became a Hellenist. That's pretty bad. She went ahead and married out of her faith. She married not just anybody. She married the Greek officer of the army. That's pretty bad. And yet, the Talmud says that wasn't the reason that the rabbis got agitated and upset at her to punish her whole family. No. You know what the reason was? Because she came into the temple and she took her foot and she kicked the Mizbeach and she turned to God and she said, Lucas, Lucas, wolf, wolf, why are you doing this? Where are you? That's also pretty bad. But that doesn't seem to be as bad as the real sins of betraying her faith and of marrying out and supporting the Greeks. That seems to be much worse. Why does it seem from the Talmud that for those major sins, she wasn't really punished for, but for what she said in the temple, for that she's punished for? Doesn't seem to be appropriate or proportionate. One final question the Rebbe asked. What's the whole theme of Sukkah? The whole theme of the festival of Sukkah, which is the tractate we're studying, we sit in the Sukkah to remember that when we left Egypt and we were in a desert and there was no protection, God miraculously protected us. God saved us from the Egyptians and put us in a shelter, and we were protected to live in the desert for 40 years. That's the theme. We think about that when we go into a Sukkah. And so, reflecting on that, if God could save us from the Egyptians, God can save us from Babylonians. God can save us from the Greeks. God can save us from the Romans. God can save us from the Germans and from the Spaniards and from everyone else who's tried to kill us. So how does this story fall in context with the whole tractate of Sukkah? Miriam comes and says, where are you, God? He's not there the way we want him to be, but he's saved us up until this point. Learn from history. Of course he can continue to save us. What's she saying over here? What is going on over here? What's the place of this story here at the end of Tractate Sukkah? So, the Rebbe at this Farbrengen offered a groundbreaking, radical explanation into this story and an insight into understanding who this Miriam was, and a lesson that we can take away from her as the sinner. And the lesson goes like this. There's a law in Maimonides, in the Rambam, the laws of divorce. And the law goes like this. If a husband and if a wife wants a divorce, but the husband refuses to give a divorce, which is a very tragic thing, and it happens, unfortunately, too often. So we pressure the husband, you have to give a divorce, but he refuses to give the get. The Rambam says, you have permission to take the husband, beat him up, literally, until he says, okay, I agree, here's the get, I'll sign it and give it to her. And he gives her the get, and she's divorced. She's free now. I'm not suggesting we do this nowadays, but that's the law. To protect the woman. The question is, there's a law that says a man cannot be coerced into giving a get. A man must give a get mindfully and willingly, almost like voluntarily. Of what benefit legally is it, therefore, to beat up the husband until he says, because he's on his last breath, writes on me, okay, I agree. What kind of agreement is that? Does he really agree, or you're just beating him up? How does that get? Why is that a kosher get? So the Rambam, in his book of Halakha, in his book of law, answers something which the Rebbe takes out from here, such a important life lesson and spiritual value. When the husband says, Rotzeh ani, when the husband says, I agree to give this get, it seems like he's saying it because he's being coerced into saying it, but it's not true. When he says, I agree, he's actually expressing his deepest truth that is coming from the depths of his soul. In the depths of his soul, he truly wants to do that which God wants from him, that which is right and correct, that which is just, that which is the mitzvah. If a woman wants a divorce because the marriage is not working out, it's a mitzvah to give a get. The husband for many months and years has said no and refused. That's not the true him. That's the Yetzer Hara. That's the many layers of distraction and confusion that are influencing a person to betray the law. But that's not the real him. Beneath the surface, beneath those layers of distortion and confusion and contamination of the Yetzer Hara, there's the true essential person, and the person really wants to do that which is correct. And when you've beaten him up, you have been peeling away all those layers. And when he comes out the words, I want to, it's not because you forced him into it. It's because you removed all the layers that are not allowing him to get there. And you've allowed his real inner truth to come out. That's the principle. It's a legal principle of the Rambam, but it's really a far larger spiritual principle. And it means as follows. You see a person who you may call a sinner, meaning their whole lifestyle is everything against God, against the Torah. They don't hold any of the Torah to be valuable, to be true. They live a lifestyle betraying the Jewish community, betraying Israel, whatever it is. It's ugly. It's unpleasant. And we're thinking about them, how could you and why could you, and have you learned nothing from Jewish history and what's going to be with the Jewish future, and you make every argument against them. Nothing seems to work. And you think, write them off the map. That's it. Lose all hope. They've gone off the deep end. Give up on them. The Rambam says, Jewish law says, the Torah says, hold on a minute. What you're seeing in them, what you're hearing from them, is not the real them. The real them, which is the depths of their neshama, is truth, is one with God, is real, is innocent, is pure. Unfortunately, they don't have any access to that. There is so much contamination in the way, so many layers that are blocking them from access with their true selves. Here you have a woman who did the worst of the worst, the unimaginable. In those days where there was so much persecution and pressure from the Greeks to Hellenize so many Jews, and she goes out and she's from the family of a Cohen, a prominent Jewish family, a royal Jewish family, and she steps outside and she says, that's it, I'm leaving this whole thing. I'm joining the enemy. Unimaginable. I'm not just joining the enemy, I'm actually marrying the chief enemy. Again, unimaginable. She's done the worst of the worst. And now she's walking into the temple with her husband who's holding a pig, and they're coming to defile the temple and destroy the temple and attempt to destroy the Jewish people and Judaism. The worst of the worst. And at that critical moment when they're there to destroy, what comes out of her mouth? Listen to her words carefully. She bangs the Mizbeach. She kicks the Mizbeach. She says, God, where are you? Why aren't you protecting your people? Our people. At this moment of crisis, you're supposed to be here protecting us. She's making a calling out for the Jewish people. She's trying to defend the Jewish people. Miriam, what are you screaming to God for about this? This is your concern. You're here to destroy the Jewish people. You're here to destroy the Jewish God. You're calling out to God in pain. The Rebbe pointed out that for all of history, Miriam is the villain. And she is the villain. But even the villain, you have to pause for a moment and think about what's really happening in their life. It looks like they're the villain. It feels like they're the villain. Their behavior is rotten. We don't know what to do with them. Don't cast them out. Pause for a moment. See what's happening. At this critical moment, she's turning to God and she's crying. She's expressing pain. You know how much pain she's in? You think she's comfortable with who she is and where she is? When you see a person who's betrayed their family, betrayed their people, betrayed God, you think they're comfortable? They tell you they're comfortable. They tell you they're proud. They act like it. They may even force themselves to feel like it. But at critical moments which affect them to their core, they discover their pain. They discover their mistakes. They discover who they truly are. And it comes out in the most sincere, true way. That's what's happening with Miriam over here. So this story is being told in the Talmud for two reasons. Number one, you could say it's a praise of the Jewish people. Why is it a praise of the Jewish people? Here you have a Jewish people who are being persecuted by the Greeks and are being given a tough time. And Torah is being eradicated, and it's a war against Judaism. You could or would imagine many Jewish people may have left the faith. Many may have given up. Many would have walked over to the other side and tried to spare their lives. Says the Talmud, no, it wasn't many. Just one, Miriam. Miriam did this all the way, but everyone else didn't. So first we have a praise about the Jewish people, that they held on to their faith in the darkest of times. Just one person left. But it's not just a praise of the Jewish people, the Rebbe said. It's a praise of Miriam. Think about it. Even Miriam, look at the way she behaves at the end of days, at the end of at that critical hour. Where does that come from? What hit her so hard? Look where she was. She found herself inside the heart of the temple, next to the Mizbeach, next to the place where Jews worshipped and sacrificed, surrounded by all those Kohanim, those righteous priests. When she was in her home, when she was outside, she was very comfortable. She was able to make that betrayal. But now she's entered in the space of the righteous. Something triggered in her. What triggered in her? Her true identity, her real self. And at that moment, look what came out. A defense of the Jewish people, a calling out on behalf of the Jewish people. You think she's disconnected? She's not disconnected. She's as connected as everybody else. That is her true self. So this story is not just a lesson in woe is to the wicked, woe is to the neighbor, which is what Abaye said explains why the entire family of Bilga was punished, was because her family was wicked and they were her neighbors and they were influenced by her. This story is also a lesson in the next principle of good for the righteous, good for his neighbor. How does Miriam turn around and unleash with her infinite, with her essential self in that moment, because she enters in a holy space surrounded by the Kohanim, and there she can't hide. And there all the layers get peeled away. And there the true Miriam comes out. And there she calls out to God. The story itself is teaching you this conclusion of the Talmud, this lesson of Abaye. And so we learn out two things from here. We learn out the power of a righteous environment, the power of a tzaddik, the power of a righteous individual. If you're near them, if you're with them, if you're connected to them, it saves you in life. It literally allows you to hold on true to your true self and your identity. Such a powerful idea. And it also teaches us the reverse, meaning think about the power of an individual. One person can influence a whole neighborhood, a whole world. We often think about, so what, I'm going to behave a certain way, I'm going to live a certain way, but my neighbor on the left does, my neighbor on the right does, everyone around me in shoulders. What influence am I having? Never underestimate living a certain way, making a certain decision, the impact that it can have far beyond everything you can imagine. And the Rebbe once told a story. This was a few years after he started the campaign of Shabbat candles. He wanted every Jewish home to light Shabbat candles. Thank God today it's pretty popular, but still not in every home. And once upon a time, 50, 60 years ago in America, it was much less popular. And so there was a campaign that was made to go out, to go to homes, to go to neighborhoods, to go to stores, help people light Shabbat candles. And probably wherever you live, if you've been to a store on the streets on Friday afternoons, you've seen boys or girls giving out Shabbat candles, encouraging people to light. A few years later, the Rebbe told the story. He said, I can tell the story now because it's not a secret, because it's public. What's the story? There was a group of Bacharim, a group of yeshiva students, who were visiting a town one summer, I believe. And no, am I correct? That's another story which I'm not going to tell now. But this story goes like this. There was a school in Israel, a secular Jewish school. And all the girls in that classroom were very secular. Nobody lit Shabbat candles at home. But one day, a religious girl or woman was visiting, perhaps teaching or something, and she mentioned this idea. She said, it's so important that you should all light Shabbat candles. None of them ever heard of Shabbat candles. So she taught them about it and about its importance of ushering the Shabbat with the light of Shabbat candles. And she gave each of them a gift. Here's some candles you can light tonight. This girl came home and she's so excited. She tells her mother, we learned in school about lighting Shabbat candles and I'm going to light them tonight. And the mother says, I don't know what you're talking about. We never lit Shabbat candles in our home. We don't do this. But the girl persisted. I want to light Shabbat candles. She was so excited for this. She learned about it in school. No, we don't do this. Anyhow, at the end, the husband said, what are you making a fight with her? Let her do whatever she wants to do. So she goes ahead, this little girl, and she lights Shabbat candles. And the rest of the family does whatever they do on Friday nights. They were watching TV, they were cooking their meals, they were partying, but this girl lit Shabbat candles. A week later, the girl, again, Friday, is excited. Mom, I want to light Shabbat candles again. This time the mother figured, I'm not going to fight against her. It's not bothering me. Let her light Shabbat candles and we'll do whatever we need to do. It didn't harm us last week, it won't harm us this week. So again, the girl lit Shabbat candles. As the candles are burning there, the mother is thinking to herself, she turns to her husband, we're sitting here watching TV and our daughter lit Shabbat candles and the candles are burning. It's not so appropriate that we're watching TV. How about we turn off the TV until the candles burn out and then we'll continue watching? And they agreed, fine. The next week, again, the girl light Shabbat candles. This time as the girl's lighting, the mother's thinking, the girl got up, she dressed for Shabbat, she's lighting Shabbat candles. I'm walking around in my jeans, in my, casual. It's not so appropriate. The candles are burning. I may as well get dressed up, and be with my daughter. Why should I fight against my daughter? Let me honor her, respect her. Weeks and weeks went by. Every week something else changed. Eventually, why are we watching TV? Why are we dressed the way we are? Why are we cooking food now? We can't cook food if the Shabbat candles are burning. Let's cook the food beforehand. We can enjoy a meal with the Shabbat candles. Long story short, this family turned into a engaged, connected, religious Jewish family. All because of one girl, one daughter, who wanted to light Shabbat candles. In other words, good for the righteous and good for his neighbors. If you are righteous, right? I'll end off with this final teaching. Last teaching for the night. Listen very carefully. The truth is, the Rebbe says, there's a contradiction in the Talmud. I don't know if you picked up on this, but it's a powerful question. The two principles conflict each other. They contradict each other. You can't have both. You can't say, woe to the wicked, woe to the neighbor, and then righteous, good for the righteous and good for the neighbor. Hold on a minute. Let's say you have two neighbors. One is righteous, one is wicked. What's going to happen over here? One principle says that the wicked will influence the righteous to become wicked. The other principle says that the righteous will influence the wicked to become righteous. You can't have both. Does the wicked influence the righteous neighbor, or does the righteous influence the wicked neighbor? Which one is it? It's a big question. So what's the answer? The answer is, as a righteous person, what kind of righteous person are you? You could be an active or inactive righteous person. An inactive righteous person means, I'm righteous, but whatever. I don't take it so seriously. I'm not so enthused about it. I'm not so excited. I'm not so passionate. I don't believe in it so much. I'm not proud of it. That kind of person will always be deeply influenced by their wicked neighbor. But a righteous person who's very proud of themselves, who believes in it, who's enthused and passionate about it, there is no question in the world that that righteous person will affect their surroundings to be more righteous also. That's how it works. There's an expression, Dvarim hayotzim min halev nichnasim el halev. Words that come from the heart enter into the heart. If you want to influence somebody else, your words have to come from your heart. You have to be real. You have to be sincere. You have to be honest with yourself. And when you are that way, you'll be able to share and influence others. So much so that the Rebbe said, if you one day are struggling because you're saying, I've worked so hard on this person, I've tried to teach them Torah, I've tried to bring them closer to the Torah and closer to the Jewish community, and it hasn't worked, you know what the Rebbe says? It's not their fault. Maybe it's your fault. Maybe your words have not been sincere enough. Maybe they haven't come from your heart. Maybe you're not as honest and passionate and enthusiastic and proud as you should be. Because were you to be like this, it is guaranteed it would influence them. The power of a righteous neighbor or the power of a wicked neighbor. So that's the lesson from Miriam. The reason why Miriam's stories in the Talmud is not just to tell us a nasty story from Jewish history. It's not just to defame her in public, but it's to show us the power, how to appreciate the power of every single Jew. No matter the state they're in, we never give up on anybody, even a woman like Miriam. Because from this episode, we learned that even in the darkest of moments, the truth of their soul is there. And the challenge that you and I have is, how do we reach it? How do we communicate with it? How do we tap into it? And how do we bring such a person back into the community, back connected to God and connected to the Torah? How do we be that righteous person that influences our surroundings to be righteous as well? That's the lesson, and that is our challenge. Thank you for joining us tonight, my friends. Have a good night, and God bless you.